Story 1. The Silent Reflection. It was a late autumn evening when I first saw it. The apartment I had rented was old, something that had been left to deteriorate over decades. The creaking floors and peeling wallpaper weren't what bothered me, though. It was the mirror. It was an antique, hung in the hallway, the kind that no one would think twice about, its tarnished frame giving it an eerie charm. I had noticed it the moment I stepped into the apartment, but I didn't think much of it. It was just a mirror. That was until one night, after I had moved in, when I saw the reflection of something that shouldn't have been there. It happened when I was coming back from a late-night shift. Exhausted, I opened the door, tossed my keys on the counter, and shuffled toward my bedroom. As I walked past the mirror, I glanced into it, barely even registering my reflection. But something caught my eye, a figure. In the mirror, it appeared as if a person was standing behind me. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I quickly turned around, expecting to see someone in the hallway, but the space was empty. I chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe the light playing tricks with my tired mind. But when I looked back into the mirror, I saw the figure again. Only this time it was closer. It was a woman, with long dark hair and pale skin, her face emotionless, staring right at me. Her eyes locked onto mine, her gaze piercing through the reflection. I wanted to move, to scream, but my body was paralyzed. I couldn't look away. The longer I stood there, the closer she seemed to get. Then in a split second, I felt something cold against my neck, like a breath, but not from the air around me. I whipped around, but there was no one there. I turned back to the mirror, and the woman's reflection had disappeared. But it didn't feel like it was gone. I could still feel her presence, the cold weight of her gaze on the back of my neck. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the light on and stayed in my bed, glancing nervously toward the hallway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the mirror again, her face never changing, her gaze always fixed on me. The next day, I decided to leave for work early, hoping to escape the dread of that apartment. When I returned in the evening, I felt the familiar weight of unease hanging in the air. I didn't want to look at the mirror, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know if it was all in my head. I cautiously approached the mirror again, my pulse racing. I stared at my reflection, trying to keep my breath steady, but it wasn't just me in the glass. The woman was there once more. She wasn't standing anymore. Now, she was sitting on the floor, her hands folded in her lap. Her head was slightly tilted to the side, as if studying me, waiting for something. I took a step closer, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the mirror surface. The moment my fingers grazed the glass, a sharp chill ran through me, like I had touched something cold and alive. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft but clear, like it was right next to my ear. "Help me." I jerked back, my breath caught in my throat, and I turned to flee. But as I ran toward the door, I heard her again, her voice now louder, her words more frantic. "Help me, please." I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I bolted out the door and into the night, not looking back. I didn't return to that apartment after that. I left all my things behind, leaving the mirror untouched, still hanging in that hallway. To this day, I don't know who the woman was or why she was there, but I know she's not just a reflection. She's still trapped inside that glass, waiting for someone to help her. But whatever she is, whatever she was, I know one thing. She's not alone in there. And I'm not sure who or what else might be trapped with her. Story 2. The reflection that wasn't mine. It was a rainy afternoon when the strange events began. I had just moved into my new apartment, one I had found online with a seemingly good price. The place had a charm to it, but it felt off, as if it held a secret. The first night I stayed there, I noticed something peculiar about the bathroom mirror. It was old, the edges frayed and tarnished with age, but it was huge, stretching from floor to ceiling. At first I thought nothing of it. It was a bathroom mirror. Who pays attention to those? But the moment I stepped in front of it to wash my hands, I felt uneasy. My reflection looked too sharp, too clear, almost like it was trying to break free from the glass. As days passed, the feeling grew stronger. I could feel it when I would pass the mirror, even if I wasn't looking directly at it. There was a presence, something I couldn't explain, lurking just beyond the reflective surface. It wasn't until one late evening that I truly saw it. I had just gotten out of the shower, steam fogging up the room, and I walked to the mirror to wipe it clean. As I reached out to grab the edge of the mirror, my reflection moved before I did. It didn't mimic me. It was like my reflection had a mind of its own. I froze, my hand still gripping the towel, watching as my reflection tilted its head, just slightly, as if studying me. I took a step back, confused and terrified, but my reflection stayed in place. Its eyes locked onto mine. Then it smiled. I didn't. It grinned, wide and unnaturally, showing teeth, but I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my throat. The smile in the mirror stretched even wider, and suddenly, my reflection raised its hand, as if trying to reach out of the glass. I staggered back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. I stared at the mirror, heart racing, waiting for my reflection to do something, anything, but it just stood there, that twisted smile still plastered on its face. I couldn't take my eyes off it. My mind raced. I turned around, thinking it would be gone when I turned back, but as I looked into the mirror again, my reflection was different. It was no longer smiling. It was crying. The tears streamed down its face, but they didn't touch me. It was as if the reflection had a life of its own, a life I didn't share. That's when I realized the truth. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. Something else had taken its place. Something darker. Every time I looked into the mirror, my reflection would change. Sometimes it would smile, other times it would scowl, but it was never me. I knew, deep in my gut, that the reflection wanted to take my place. It wanted to come out of the mirror. I started locking the bathroom door at night, covering the mirror with towels, but it didn't matter. The presence was still there. Every time I walked past the bathroom, I could feel it watching me. One night, in a fit of terror, I decided to destroy the mirror. I grabbed a hammer and smashed it, watching as it shattered into 1,000 pieces. But as the glass fell to the floor, the air turned cold. I heard a soft whisper, almost like a lullaby, and I turned around to see my reflection standing in the shattered pieces of the mirror, smiling at me. But it wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was real. Story 3. The Silent Mirror. It was a cold winter evening when I first noticed the mirror in the old guest room. I had recently moved into an old Victorian house, one with a history, a story buried in the dust of time. The house had been vacant for years before I found it at a ridiculous price, and the realtor didn't seem to know much about its past. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a chill in the air that never quite left, no matter how high I turned up the heating. But it was the guest room, tucked away at the far end of the hallway, that gave me the creeps. I had never been one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but there was something about that room. It wasn't much, just an old, heavy bed and a few pieces of worn furniture. But in the corner, there was a mirror. It was old-fashioned, with a dark wooden frame, almost ornate in its design. I avoided it at first, chalking up my unease to the fact that I was alone in an unfamiliar place. But it wasn't long before I found myself drawn to it. One evening, after unpacking the last of my boxes, I decided to take a break and sit down in the guest room. The mirror caught my eye as soon as I entered, reflecting the dim light from the hallway. There was something unsettling about the way it seemed to reflect not just the room, but the room beyond it, as if it had a view into another world. I tried to shake off the feeling and sat down in the chair across from it, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I don't know how long I stared into the mirror, but at some point I noticed something strange. The reflection wasn't quite right. The room looked the same, but quieter. The shadows in the reflection were deeper, darker, and the air in the mirror seemed to ripple, like a heat wave distorting the view. My own reflection, too, seemed off. I could see myself, yes, but my movements were slow, as if I wasn't entirely in control. I leaned in closer, my heart beginning to race. That's when I saw it. In the reflection, the door to the guest room was slowly opening. But I hadn't moved. The door was closed behind me. I jumped to my feet, my breath quickening, and turned around. The door was shut tight. I stared at it for a few moments, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Then, without thinking, I turned back to the mirror. The door in the reflection was wide open now, and I could see something or someone standing in the doorway. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I looked closer, I could see it more clearly. A figure, tall and shadowed, with a faint outline of a face that was barely visible. The figure seemed to be looking directly at me, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw its eyes. Empty, hollow, dark. I stumbled backward, crashing into the old wooden chair behind me. My reflection, meanwhile, did not move. It stood frozen, staring back at me, an eerie silence filling the room. I reached for my phone to call anyone, but when I looked back up at the mirror, the figure in the doorway was gone. The door was now firmly closed again. I blinked, not sure if I had imagined the whole thing. But as I looked closer, I noticed something even more terrifying. In the reflection, there were now faint handprints on the glass, smeared from the inside. I ran out of the room and shut the door behind me, my mind reeling. But the next day, when I went to check the guest room again, the mirror was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen, and deep down, I understood that the mirror had never been truly empty. It had always been waiting for someone, waiting for me. Story 4. The Mirror's Whisper. It was a rainy night when I first discovered the truth about the mirror in my grandmother's house. My family had always told me that the old house was full of secrets, but I never understood what they meant until that night. I had come over to stay with her for a while, and everything felt fine until I wandered into her bedroom. The room was old-fashioned, with heavy curtains that blocked out the light, and in the corner was a large, ornate mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a piece of furniture, right? But as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. Every time I walked past it, I felt an odd sensation, a chill creeping up my spine. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was the draft or the fact that the house was so old. But then, one evening, I found myself standing in front of it, staring at my reflection. As I looked closer, I noticed something wrong. My reflection didn't move like I did. It wasn't that it was delayed or out of sync. No, it was worse than that. It was as if my reflection was staring back at me with its own intent, its own mind. It didn't blink when I did. It didn't even breathe. I took a step back, feeling my heart pound in my chest. That's when it happened. My reflection slowly smiled, a wide grin stretching across its face. But I didn't smile. I was horrified, unable to move. The reflection grinned wider, its smile growing to an unnatural size, and in the quiet of the room, I heard it. A whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. You can never leave. Frozen, I couldn't look away from the mirror. My reflection slowly began to raise a hand, but it wasn't like I was raising my hand. It was like it was reaching for me, trying to pull me into the glass. My chest tightened with fear as I stumbled backward, breaking free from the trance. I ran out of the room, my mind racing. But as I reached the door, I heard another whisper, this time clearer. You belong to me now. The next morning, I decided to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. But as I grabbed my bags, I noticed something horrifying. The mirror was gone. Not just the frame, but the mirror itself had vanished. I searched every corner of the room, but there was no trace of it. It was as if it had never been there at all. I left my grandmother's house that day and never looked back. But the memory of the whisper still haunts me. I don't know what happened to that mirror or where it went, but I'm certain of one thing. Whatever it wasn't just a reflection. It was something alive, something that wanted me. And I'll never forget the whisper, the promise it made. You can never leave. Story 5. The Mirror's Curse. I had always been a skeptic, never once believing in the supernatural, much to my family's dismay. They always warned me about certain things in the house, especially the old, full-length mirror that hung in the hallway. It was an antique, passed down for generations, and my grandmother used to say it was cursed. I never took her seriously. After all, how could an old mirror have such power? It was just a piece of glass, right? It was late one evening, when my skepticism would be put to the test. I had been alone in the house for a few days, the rain tapping against the windows, adding to the silence that filled the air. As I passed by the hallway, I glanced into the mirror, and that's when I saw it, a shadow moving behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the longer I looked, the clearer it became. The shadow wasn't a trick of the light. It was a figure, a person, standing just a few inches behind me. I turned around, my heart racing, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. I laughed nervously at myself, brushing it off as nothing more than a product of the storm outside, casting odd reflections on the glass. But when I turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there, closer this time, its face just inches from mine, though the reflection showed no features, just a void. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The figure raised its hand, as if to touch the glass, and I could feel my body tense in terror. I backed away, heart pounding, but the mirror seemed to draw me in like a magnet pulling at my soul. I tried to look away, but my eyes wouldn't leave the reflection. And that's when I heard it, an unmistakable whisper, cold and hissing. "You're mine now." In a panic, I bolted from the hallway, but the feeling of being watched never left. I couldn't shake the image of the figure in the mirror, its faceless stare, the way it moved as I moved. The rest of the night, I barely slept, constantly looking over my shoulder. But as morning came and I made my way downstairs, something caught my eye. The mirror in the hallway was gone. I ran to the spot where it had hung, my mind racing. The wall was bare. No mirror, no frame, nothing. I searched the entire house, frantically opening every closet, checking every room. But the mirror had vanished as if it had never existed. A week passed, and the strange occurrences continued. My reflection in any mirror I looked into began to behave differently. It would move before I did, its actions delayed, its eyes never quite aligned with mine. I realized too late that the mirror had not just disappeared, it had taken something from me. I could feel the pull, like the figure in the glass was still there, waiting to claim me. And no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape it. Now, every time I look into a mirror, I see the empty, faceless figure standing just behind me. It's a constant reminder. I'm not alone. Not anymore. The curse of the mirror had followed me, and there's no escaping it. The reflection is not just a reflection anymore. Story 6, The Silent Reflection. I've always been drawn to old things, antiques, especially mirrors. There's something about their history, the way they capture moments and reflections from years gone by. So, when I stumbled upon an old, dusty mirror at a flea market, I couldn't resist. The seller claimed it was a century-old piece, hand-carved and intricate in design. The glass was cloudy with age, but the frame was beautiful, and I thought it would make a perfect addition to my apartment. The first few days were fine. I hung it in my hallway, admired its beauty, and never thought twice about it. But then things started happening. Small things at first. Noises in the hallway when I was alone, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye when I passed by the mirror. But the real terror started one night when I got home late, exhausted from work. I passed the mirror as I always did, but this time I stopped. Something felt wrong. My reflection wasn't right. I could see my face, my tired eyes, but behind me, in the reflection, I saw a figure, a woman, standing still, staring at me. But when I turned around, no one was there. I brushed it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. But the next night, the woman was there again. And this time, she was closer. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and empty, staring directly at me, unblinking. She didn't move, but I could feel her presence. It was like she was reaching out from the mirror itself. I stepped away quickly, heart pounding. I didn't want to believe it, but the next few days only made things worse. The woman appeared more frequently, and every time I looked in the mirror, she was closer, her pale, emotionless face becoming clearer, more defined. It was as if she was waiting for something. But what? One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, waiting for her to move. But she didn't. The silence was deafening, and then, without warning, her reflection began to slowly move on its own. It was subtle at first, her fingers twitching, her head tilting slightly. Then, she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It was just a hollow, empty space, as if her voice had been stolen. I was paralyzed with fear. My reflection, in contrast, stayed still, not mimicking her actions. It was as if I was looking into a completely different world, one that was growing more real with every second. And then she spoke. Her lips didn't move, but I heard it clearly in my mind. "You shouldn't have brought me here." Her voice was like a whisper from the grave, cold and dead. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air around me felt thick and suffocating. The woman in the mirror stretched out her hand, as if trying to reach me, and I could feel the cold emanating from the glass. Her fingers almost touched the surface before I snapped back, tearing myself away from the mirror. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, and I could hear her silent whisper. "You shouldn't have brought me here." I packed up my things, left the apartment, and never looked back. But I still wonder, what was she? Was she a lost soul, trapped in the mirror? Or was she something worse? The worst part? Every time I walk past any mirror now, I swear I see her reflection just behind mine, always watching. I'll never be able to escape her. And I'm sure that she'll find her way to me again, no matter where I go. The mirror is a door, and I've opened it. Story 7. The reflection that watches. It was my first night alone in my new apartment. I had recently moved into an old building, the kind that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. The landlord had warned me that the building had its quirks, but I didn't think much of it. I liked the apartment. It was quaint, with high ceilings and an old-fashioned charm. The mirror in the bathroom was a bit out of place, though. It was large, framed in dark, intricate wood, and had a strange aura about it. The moment I stepped into the bathroom, something about it unsettled me, but I didn't think much of it. I was just tired from the move. That night, after unpacking, I decided to take a hot shower to unwind. The water was soothing, and for a moment, I forgot about the strange feeling I had been having. But when I stepped out and glanced into the mirror, I froze. My reflection was off. It wasn't the usual image I saw when I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was standing still, but it wasn't mimicking my every movement. It was slightly delayed, like a second behind. I figured it was just the steam fogging up the glass, distorting things. But then I noticed something more disturbing. My reflection wasn't smiling when I was. It was standing motionless, its eyes staring directly at me, locked in an unsettling gaze. I quickly turned away and wiped the fog from the mirror, trying to brush it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I turned back to look, my reflection had moved. It didn't move like I did. It stood in place, still staring at me, and then slowly, it raised its hand, mirroring my movements but with a chilling delay. The more I looked, the more my reflection seemed to grow detached from me, as if it was watching me rather than mimicking my actions. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The room suddenly felt colder, and the hair on my neck stood up. Without thinking, I backed away from the mirror, but my reflection didn't move. It stayed in place, watching me. A sudden urge to leave the bathroom consumed me, and I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I saw it again in the corner of my eye. The reflection in the mirror, now grinning. The smile was wide, sinister, and I realized with growing terror that I hadn't been smiling. My reflection had taken on a life of its own. I rushed out of the bathroom and slammed the door behind me. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I could still feel those cold eyes on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the reflection, staring back, waiting. I didn't sleep a wink that night, terrified that the moment I looked into any mirror, my reflection would be there, waiting, watching, and grinning that horrifying grin. The next day, I tried to go about my life as usual. I forced myself to look into the bathroom mirror again, but it was the same. My reflection was no longer synchronized with me. It didn't move with me. It just stood there staring, never breaking its cold, unsettling gaze. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things and left. But as I walked out the door, I caught a glimpse of the bathroom mirror in the corner of my eye. And I saw it again. My reflection was watching me leave. It hadn't followed me out of the bathroom, but I could feel it, its eyes on my back. Now, I can't look into any mirror without feeling that same sense of dread. I'll catch a glimpse of myself in store windows or on a bus, and I'll see it, my reflection, watching, waiting. It's like it's following me. I've tried moving, tried leaving it all behind, but no matter where I go, I can feel the reflection watching me. It's always there, waiting, and I know it's only a matter of time before it catches up. Story 8. The Mirror That Traps. It was the second week of my move into the old Victorian house. At first, everything seemed perfect. The quaint, quiet neighborhood, the tall, looming trees in the front yard, and the house itself, with its creaky floors and antique furnishings. But something was off. The house had an eerie atmosphere, and every time I passed the hallway mirror, I would feel like I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that mirror wasn't right. I avoided looking into it, but there was something drawing me back. Every night, as the shadows crept across the house, the mirror seemed to whisper to me, beckoning me, urging me to look. One night, after a long day of unpacking and cleaning, I went to the bathroom, feeling exhausted. I glanced into the mirror, expecting to see my tired reflection, but instead, the glass seemed to shimmer as if it were alive. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion, but the mirror wasn't just reflecting me anymore. It was reflecting a different scene, one that wasn't in the room at all. The reflection in the mirror was of a room that looked exactly like mine, but darker, colder. And in that reflection, there was a figure, a woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes, standing just behind me. I whipped around in panic, but there was no one there. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure in the reflection was now closer, her face inches from the glass. Her lips curled into a sickening smile. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, tripping over the bathroom rug. I thought maybe I had misread it, but when I looked into the mirror again, the woman was standing in the reflection, watching me, her eyes following my every move. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that she wasn't just a reflection anymore. She was alive, trapped within the glass, and she knew I could see her. The woman in the mirror started to press her hands against the glass, her face contorting with desperation. I could feel the coldness of her breath on the back of my neck. In a panic, I backed away, but as I did, I could hear her voice, low, raspy, like a whisper from beyond the grave, saying, "Let me out." I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get away from that mirror. I grabbed a towel, draped it over the mirror, and ran out of the bathroom. But every time I tried to leave the house, the feeling followed me. The reflection of the woman would appear in every mirror, no matter where I went, her face pressed against the glass, her hollow eyes following me. I even saw her in the mirrors at the local grocery store and in the reflection of the car window. She was everywhere. She wouldn't let me escape. That night, I sat on the floor, too terrified to sleep. I heard whispers, faint voices calling my name, and I knew she was there, somewhere in the house, watching me. As the clock struck midnight, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. I stood up and slowly crept toward the source, terrified of what I might find. When I reached the hallway, I looked at the mirror, and that's when I saw her, standing in the reflection, her pale face twisted in a grotesque grin. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. The figure in the mirror was no longer a reflection. It was stepping out of the glass, her fingers curling around the edge of the frame. I screamed, but it was too late. She reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the mirror. I struggled, but I couldn't break free. The woman's grip tightened, and before I knew it, I was sucked into the glass, trapped in the dark, cold world within the mirror. Now, I am the one trapped. I can see everything, but I can't escape. The woman is here with me, always smiling that horrible smile, always watching. I can hear the whispers of those who come near the mirror, but no one can see me. I am lost in this endless reflection, waiting for the next person to come and look into the mirror, waiting for the next victim to be trapped.